The old Korean woman grabbed my wrist so hard her fingernails dug into my skin. She wasn't screaming. That was the frightening part. Her eyes locked onto mine, wide with a kind of terror I had never seen in 15 years of nursing. Not confusion, not pain, terror. Behind us, outside the iron gate of that enormous Mulholland Drive house, 3 men in dark clothing were forcing their way inside. One was speaking into a phone calmly, like this was just another job. I still had a garden hoe in my hands from helping Mrs. Park trim her roses 20 minutes earlier. Dirt stained my scrubs. My hair was falling loose from my bun, and those men looked experienced, the kind who had done this before. I want to tell you I felt brave. I didn't. My legs were shaking so badly I could barely stay standing. My mouth was dry. My heart felt like it was trying to break out of my chest, but Hannah Park's hand stayed wrapped around my wrist. And she wasn't letting go, so neither did I. My name is Adiz Okonkwo. I was born in Enugu, Nigeria, the 4th of 7 children. My mother was a midwife. My father sold building materials. We survived by stretching every dollar until it almost broke. I came to America in 2009 with 2 suitcases, a nursing license, and $340. For a long time, I lived on my aunt's couch in Inglewood, working double shifts while studying for my American nursing exams. One night after work, I sat alone eating microwaved rice while talking to my mother back home on the phone. The moment I heard her voice, the distance between us hit me so hard it felt physical. After we hung up, I made myself a promise. I would survive here. I would build something real. And no matter how hard life became, I would keep sending money home. Years later, I finally had my own apartment in Gardena. Small, slightly damp, but mine, home healthcare suited me. When you care for people inside their homes, you see the loneliness they hide from the world. You see which families show up and which ones slowly disappear. I cared for lonely veterans, widows with dementia, and retired teachers abandoned by their children. Every patient changed me a little, but none changed me like Hannah Park. The call came on a Tuesday morning in April 2019. My supervisor, Cecil, almost never called me personally, so I knew immediately something was unusual. Adiz, she said quietly, this family is very private. The pay is excellent, but they've already dismissed 3 nurses. Why? I asked. A short pause. The son is extremely protective. He wants someone experienced, someone who knows how to mind their business. I understood exactly what she meant. Some wealthy families protect their privacy because they're embarrassed. Others protect it because their lives are dangerous. I accepted the assignment anyway, partly because I needed the money. My mother's hospital bills back in Nigeria were growing, and my rent had just increased. But I was curious too. 2 days later, I drove up Mulholland Drive. The house sat behind tall black gates surrounded by security cameras. Not normal home security either. Professional-level cameras that tracked movement. 2 men stood near the entrance pretending to look relaxed, but their eyes never stopped scanning the street. One checked my identification carefully before opening the gate. Inside, the house was enormous, quiet, and painfully expensive. Stone floors, dark glass walls, Korean artwork hanging beside antique ceramics. On a nearby shelf sat a framed photograph. An older Korean couple stood side by side without touching. The man looked calm in a way that didn't feel peaceful, more controlled than peaceful. She is not easy, I turned. A Korean man about 45 stood in the hallway watching me. Slim build, sharp face, white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled neatly at the wrists. His eyes missed nothing. My mother can be difficult, he said. The other nurses couldn't handle her. I met his gaze calmly. People become difficult when they're frightened, I said, or grieving. Your mother had a stroke. That changes a person. He studied me for several long seconds. Then he nodded once. Come, he said. Hannah Park sat in a sunlit room overlooking the garden and the hazy hills of Los Angeles. She was smaller than I expected. White hair neatly pinned back, silk blouse, perfect posture despite the stroke that had weakened her left hand. And on her wrist was a jade bracelet she touched constantly without realizing it. Not jewelry, something deeper than that. She studied me carefully when I entered, saying nothing at first. This is Adiz Okonkwo, her son said, your new nurse. Hannah repeated my name slowly, testing it, then she shook her head slightly. Too long, she said in heavily accented English. I call you Ada. I almost corrected her. Instead, I smiled politely. That's fine. For the first time, something softened in her face, not quite a smile, more like approval. Sit, she said quietly. And that was how our story began. The first weeks were difficult. Hannah Park was proud, stubborn, and deeply lonely. She refused help whenever possible, complained about the food. Barely answered questions, but I understood something her son didn't. She wasn't cold. She was grieving. So instead of arguing, I paid attention. I noticed which foods she actually ate. I asked the house manager, Min, about the meals she loved before her stroke. Then I drove to Koreatown and bought the ingredients myself. One afternoon, I served her soup made the way she remembered from Korea. She tasted it slowly, then looked at me. You went to H Mart. Yes. Why? Because you haven't been eating enough, I said. For a long moment, she simply studied me. Then she picked up her spoon and finished every drop. After that, things changed between us. Slowly. She began talking while we sat in the garden during the evenings. She told me about growing up near the sea in Busan, about marrying young, about spending years becoming the kind of quiet wife her generation expected women to be. And little by little, she asked about me too. One afternoon she asked, "Tell me something about Nigeria." I smiled. In my culture, I said, people say strong women inherit strength from their fathers. But the women I knew believed their strength came from their mothers. Hannah nodded softly. This is true everywhere, she said. From then on, our days settled into a rhythm. Medicine in the morning. Tea in the afternoon. Conversations in the garden at sunset. I learned she had 3 children, one son living in the house, a daughter in Seoul, and another son she mentioned only once. The one who left, she called him quietly. I didn't ask questions, but I noticed something else. Every time Hannah spoke about her late husband or her family, her fingers touched the jade bracelet on her wrist. That bracelet held her grief. And somehow, without either of us saying it aloud, she understood I carried my own grief too. 2 women from different worlds, both lonely in different ways. Both learning slowly how to trust each other. It was a Sunday morning in June, 2 months into my assignment, when I first noticed the car. A black sedan, older model, tinted windows. Parked across from the gate when I arrived at 7:30 in the morning. I didn't think much of it. The neighborhood had traffic, but it was there again in the evening when I left. The next day it was in a slightly different position, further down the road, but still with a clear sightline to the gate. As though whoever was inside had made a small adjustment to be less obvious. Which paradoxically made it more obvious. I mentioned it to Min. He went very still when I described it. What color did you say? He asked. Black, older sedan. I only caught part of the license plate. 824. Min looked at me with something in his eyes that I couldn't quite name. Something between concern and something more careful than concern. I'll let Mr. Park know, he said. Is there something I should be concerned about? I asked. No, he said, too quickly. The word came out the way words come out when a person says the opposite of what they mean because saying the truth would cost too much. I went back to Hannah, but I kept thinking about that car. I started paying closer attention to things I had initially accepted as ordinary. The security men on the property, there were 3 of them, rotating shifts, professionally unobtrusive. But always there, always positioned at specific points around the perimeter, always watching outward, toward the street, toward the world outside. The phone calls James Park received. He was rarely in the house, but when he was, his calls were taken in a study at the far end of a hallway, behind a door that was always closed. On 2 occasions I heard voices, not just his, and the conversations, though in Korean, carried the particular low, compressed quality of discussions about serious things. The kind of serious that has consequences. There were visitors at unusual hours, twice in the evening. Once very late at night, when I returned for a file I had forgotten. The lights in the parking area were on, and 2 large black vehicles were parked side by side. And then one afternoon, Min said something he clearly hadn't intended to say. We were in the kitchen. He was tired, I could see it in his posture, the way his usual careful composure had slipped. He said, without seeming to think about it, Mr. Park is dealing with a situation. It should be resolved soon. What kind of situation? I asked. He caught himself. sat up straighter. I shouldn't have said that, I'm sorry. Min, I said gently, is Mrs. Park safe here? He met my eyes, and what I saw there told me more than his words were going to. The security is very good, he said. She is protected. Min, is she safe? A long pause. She is protected, he said again, and that was all. That night I sat at my kitchen table in Gardena, and I thought about what I knew and what I suspected. I am not a naive woman. I understood that wealth often comes with shadows attached. I had been in this house 2 months. I knew Hannah Park in a way that had become genuinely important to me. What I didn't know was what exactly James Park's world consisted of, what it had cost, what kinds of enemies it generated. I thought about calling Cecil and asking to be reassigned. I want to tell you I made that decision quickly and easily. I didn't. I thought about it for a long time. I sat in my kitchen with the lights off and thought about the right thing to do when the right thing and the safe thing are not the same thing. And then I thought about Hannah, the amber evening light around her hand moving to the jade bracelet when she spoke of her husband. The particular quality of her loneliness, old and deep and carefully managed but real. I stayed. In July, the heat was so heavy and dry it felt like the air itself was exhausted. We were in the garden in the early evening when the temperature had dropped enough to breathe. Hannah liked the garden, especially the roses. She knew each variety. She knew exactly what they needed. She spoke to them sometimes in Korean, quietly, a low rhythmic murmur that was almost like singing. I was sitting on a stone bench nearby, close enough to help if she lost her balance. Ada, she said without looking up. Yes. Do you know what my son does? I was careful. I know he runs businesses. She made a small sound that might have been a laugh. Yes. Businesses, she kept working, her good hand moving carefully among the roses. Then she said, I did not know for many years. When Junho was young, when he became a man, I did not ask. His father knew, his father chose not to explain to me. And then his father died, she said, and certain things became impossible to not know. She still didn't look at me. Are you afraid? I asked. She was quiet for so long I thought she wasn't going to answer. I am afraid of many things, she said finally. I am afraid I failed him. I am afraid of what he has become. I am afraid that I stayed silent for too long and that my silence made it easier for him to become this. I sat with that. My other son, she said, and then she stopped. You don't have to tell me, I said. He left, she said. 14 years ago, he said he could not live inside what this family had become. He said staying would make him a part of it. He packed one bag, he left. I have not seen him since. Her hand had stopped moving among the roses. He emails me, she said very quietly, on my birthday, and at Chuseok, short messages. Careful messages, nothing that could be traced back to anything real. She paused. He has a son, my grandchild. I have seen photographs. That boy has never met me. I felt something break quietly in my chest. Hannah, I said. He was right to leave, she said, with the flat finality of someone who has made peace with a grief so heavy that arguing against it would be exhausting. He was the only one of my children who understood that you cannot exist inside a fire without eventually burning. She turned and looked at me then. Her eyes were dry. Her face was composed. But I had been a nurse long enough to know what controlled grief looks like from the inside out. I am glad you are here, Ada, she said, simply, quietly. So am I told her. And I meant it completely. I looked down at the jade bracelet on her wrist, catching the last of the evening light, green and quiet and worn smooth. I thought about all the years it had been there, absorbing every grief she had never said aloud. I didn't know then that one day she would give it to me. 3 days later, James Park came to the house during the day. He came into the room where I was helping Hannah with her arm exercises and stood in the doorway watching. Then he said, "Could I speak with you alone?" Hannah said something sharply in Korean. James answered her with what sounded like reassurance. She looked at me, and in her look was something I couldn't fully read, something between caution and an instruction she couldn't say openly. I followed him into the hallway. He was a contained man. Even carrying significant tension, he moved and spoke with the economy of someone who had trained himself to reveal only what he deliberately chose to reveal. He had built walls so carefully and for so long that I suspected he had forgotten what it felt like to stand without them. You have been here 2 months, he said. 2 months and a few days, I said. My mother speaks well of you. I'm glad. He looked at me carefully. Have you noticed anything unusual outside the property? Any vehicles, any people? There was a black sedan, I said, parked on the road about 2 weeks ago, clear sightline to the gate. I mentioned it to Min. Something shifted very slightly in his expression. Has it been back? Not that I've seen. But if someone knew my schedule, they could avoid being visible to me. He studied me. You think clearly. I was trained to observe, I said. It's part of the job. He nodded slowly. Then he said, I want to ask something beyond your contract. Tell me, if you see anything unusual, anything, I need you to contact me directly. He held out a card. Just a phone number, no name. And I need you to never leave my mother alone on the property. The security team watches the perimeter. But near her, inside, you are the one I trust. You've known me 2 months, Mr. Park. My mother trusts you, he said. That has never happened this fast, not with anyone. He paused. I trust her judgment. I took the card. One question, I said. Yes. Is she in danger? He held my gaze. There are people who would use her to reach me, he said. That is all I'll say. He left. I went back to Hannah. She was holding her arm elevated the way I had asked. She looked at me with that careful, searching attention. What did he say? She asked. He asked me to take good care of you, I said. She nodded once. Then she reached out with her good hand and placed it briefly over mine. Warm, deliberate. The first time she had touched me with pure, unreserved warmth. We went back to her exercises. We didn't speak further, but the air had changed. The way air changes before a storm, when the sky still looks perfectly clear. It was a Wednesday in late July. The day started completely normally. Hannah's vitals were stable. Her blood pressure slightly elevated, nothing alarming, but I noted it carefully. She ate well at breakfast. She was thoughtful and quieter than usual, which sometimes happened after speaking with her daughter in Seoul. The call had been the previous evening, and I had heard through the wall the careful, managed quality of the conversation. No warmth, no laughter. 2 people maintaining a relationship that both of them found difficult and neither was willing to release. After lunch, Hannah wanted to work in the garden. The morning fog had burned off and the afternoon was warm but bearable. I helped her outside with her wide-brimmed hat and her gardening gloves. At the small shed near the back wall, I found the garden tools. I handed Hannah the small hand trowel she used for working around the base of the rose bushes. I kept the longer-handled garden hoe for moving mulch. The garden was quiet. One of the security men was visible near the far side of the property, stationed at his usual position with his usual careful stillness. Hannah was crooning softly to a cluster of cream roses. Some old melody I didn't recognize, low and rhythmic and quite beautiful. I was thinking about nothing in particular, just present. Just there in that quiet afternoon garden, with the sound of Lowe's angels somewhere far below us and the roses in full summer bloom. And then I heard the sound from the direction of the front gate. Not dramatic, not loud, a careful, deliberate metallic sound, like someone working a latch from the outside with a tool, slowly and methodically. I looked up. The security man I had been watching from where I stood, his position was empty. He was simply gone. My first thought was that he had rotated, moved to another position the way they sometimes did. My second thought came very fast after the first, and it wasn't a thought so much as a physical sensation. Cold, sudden, settling in my stomach like a stone dropped into still water. Something was wrong. I picked up the hoe, not a decision exactly. My hands made that choice before my mind fully caught up with what was happening. Hannah, I said. I kept my voice completely level. The way I had been trained to speak during a medical emergency, steady and deliberate no matter what is happening inside you. Come inside. Let's go inside right now. She read me immediately. I watched it happen across her face, the shift from gentle afternoon softness to sharp, focused awareness. She had lived long enough inside a dangerous world to know, instantly and without doubt, when something had broken. She stood up. She didn't ask a single question. She moved toward the house door. And that was when the gate opened. Not kicked open, not forced dramatically. It opened smoothly, the way gates open when someone has the code calmly, as though it were an entirely ordinary entry. 3 men came through. They moved quickly but without running. The way professionals move, covering ground efficiently, maintaining control. Dark clothing. 2 of them were carrying something. In the garden light, I couldn't identify it precisely. Metal bars or bats, long and heavy. The third man was on his phone, speaking rapidly in a low voice. And in that moment, with absolute, terrible clarity, I understood. These men were here for Hana. She was the objective. They intended to take her. I thought of Min saying she is protected. I thought of the gate opening smoothly, from the inside code. I thought of the security man who had simply disappeared from his post seconds before these men walked through. And the cold thing in my stomach turned to ice. Someone had opened the door from inside. This had been arranged, not from the outside, from within. Later I would learn exactly who. But in that moment, I had about 4 seconds before those men crossed the garden and reached her. Hana made a sound behind me, not a scream. A sharp, compressed intake of breath. And then she grabbed my wrist exactly the way she had at the very beginning of this story. Her nails going in, her hand locked tight. I am not a hero. I need you to understand that clearly. I am a woman who has worked hard all her life, who is afraid of many things, who has no combat training and no special physical power. I am a woman who was raised by a midwife mother who said, "You protect what you love with whatever is in your hands." I had a garden hoe in my hands. The men had crossed half the garden by the time I moved. I turned to Hana. I spoke directly into her face, holding her eyes. "Get behind that stone bench and stay low. Scream. Scream as loud as you can and don't stop. The neighbors will hear you." Then I turned and I walked forward. I know how this sounds. I know what you're thinking. But listen to me carefully. I did not walk forward because I believed I could fight 3 men and win. I am not a fool. I walked forward because if I stepped backward, they would have her. The lead man stopped when I moved toward him. He hadn't expected it. He had expected the nurse to retreat, to press herself against the wall or run for the house door. That was what the calculation had been built around. The nurse retreats. The old woman is alone. He had not expected me to walk toward him with a garden hoe. "Stop," I said. My voice came out louder and cleaner than I had any right to expect. "Stop right there." He said something to the others. In Korean, I didn't understand the words. I understood the tone, surprise, recalibration. Then he said to me in English, "Move aside, this does not concern you." "She is my patient," I said. "She is in my care. Whatever you think you're doing, it ends here." He took 1 step forward. I raised the hoe. He stopped. Here is what I understood in that moment, with the clarity that only real danger provides. A garden hoe is not a weapon. But it is long and it has weight at one end, and a woman holding it with clear intention creates a specific problem for men who need their objective alive and undamaged. They could not simply run over me without risking harm to Hana in the chaos. They needed a clean grab. I was preventing a clean grab. Behind me, Hana screamed. It wasn't the weak, wavering sound you might expect from a 74-year-old woman with a partially weakened body. It was a sound that came from somewhere deep and primal, the sound of a woman who had survived difficult things and was not finished surviving. "Help! Somebody help! Call police!" Her voice carried over the garden wall, over the property, into the quiet Mulholland Drive evening. The man on the phone said something urgent, faster now, more pressured. The third man, the one who had hung back, began moving to my right, circling, trying to get past me and around to Hana. I pivoted. I swung the hoe. The metal end caught him hard across his upper arm and shoulder. The sound it made was solid and real. He stumbled backward with a sharp sound, part pain, part shock, and went down on one knee in the garden path, scattering mulch. The lead man moved on me then. Fast. His arm coming up to grab the hoe handle. I pulled back and swung low, catching his forearm as he reached, the force of the contact running all the way up through my hands and shoulders. He made a harsh sound and stepped back, gripping his arm. The second man was still coming. I turned to face him and I was backing up now, the hoe between us, and my legs were shaking so hard beneath me, I was genuinely afraid they would give out. And I thought with absolute calm certainty, I cannot hold this much longer, and then I heard it. A car on the road outside. Then another. And then lights through the iron gate, white and blue strobing across the garden, and a sound that I felt in every single cell of my body. Sirens. The men looked at each other. Something passed between them in that fraction of a second, the calculation of professional criminals assessing changed odds. The man on the phone said something clipped and final. All three turned. They moved back across the garden with the same controlled efficiency they had arrived with, still professionals, even in retreat. Through the gate and running up the road before the first police car was even fully stopped outside. I stood in the garden. The hoe was still in my hands. I was still gripping it with everything I had, and then my legs gave out, not dramatically. They simply stopped working. I sat down on the garden path, right there among Hannah's roses, on the soil we had worked in together that same afternoon. I sat down and I shook. Hannah crossed the garden to me. Slowly, because her left side was always slow. Her right hand brushing the tops of the rose bushes as she moved, steadying herself against them. She reached where I was sitting on the ground, and she lowered herself carefully, with effort, right onto the garden path beside me. In her silk blouse and her good dark trousers. In her 74-year-old post-stroke body, right onto the ground. And she put her arm around me. She didn't say a single word, she just held on. And I, Adiz Okonkwo, who had not cried in front of a patient in 15 years, who prided myself on professional composure, who had survived immigration and loneliness and institutional discrimination and years of invisible hard work without allowing myself the luxury of public tears. I put my face in my hands. And I shook. Hannah held on through all of it, her good arms solid and warm around my shoulders, her small body steady beside mine. Two women from completely different worlds, sitting on the ground in a rose garden, while the sound of sirens filled the evening air around us. She held on until I stopped shaking. The police were there for 2 hours. One of the security men was found unconscious near the side wall of the property, hit from behind, they said. Another was discovered locked in the security monitoring booth with a cut on his head and his radio disabled. And the third security man, the one I had watched from the garden and then not seen, was simply gone. His personal belongings cleared out of the booth, his phone disconnected. He had left cleanly and deliberately, exactly when he needed to, because he had known precisely what was coming and had helped make it possible. He was the inside man. He had been on the security team for 18 months. 18 months of arriving every morning, of nodding at me in the kitchen hallway, of standing near Hannah's window while she worked in her garden. 18 months of memorizing, gate codes and security rotations, and daily schedules. 18 months of building trust inside that house, while simultaneously building a file of everything that trust gave him access to. A business rival of James Parks had paid for that information. Had paid for the access, the timing, the opened gate, the cleared security post. The kidnapping was not random. It was not opportunistic. It was researched, planned, and executed with inside knowledge. And when I sat in that garden and thought about how close it had come, how the margin between what happened and what almost happened was measured in nothing more than the length of a garden hoe, and the loudness of one old woman's voice, my hands started shaking all over again. The detective who interviewed me was a woman, direct and thorough. I gave my account clearly and completely. The 3 men had fled in a vehicle found 2 blocks away, stolen, wiped, abandoned with professional cleanliness. They were not immediately found. I will not tell you everything about what happened to them afterward, or to the inside man, or to the business rival who had arranged all of this. Some of what I learned came through formal channels. Some of it I pieced together from things Min told me much later, and some of it I chose, deliberately, not to fully know. What I know is this. James Parks' world had consequences that moved in directions a nurse from Enugu had no business following. What I also know is that, when I sat in that detective's presence and described exactly what had happened in that garden, I did not minimize what I had done. I did not say I just happened to be there or anyone would have done the same. I looked at that detective and I said, I protected my patient, and I would do it again. 2 days after the attack, James Park asked to speak with me. I was in Hannah's back room. She was resting. The late afternoon light was coming through the windows, and the garden below looked peaceful and unremarkable, as though nothing had happened in it 2 days before. We sat across from each other. He looked different, still composed, still controlled, But something beneath the composure was different, something he was carrying that he hadn't been carrying the same way before. Like a weight that had shifted position and was now pressing on a different part of him. "My mother would like you to stay," he said. "Long-term, permanent." "I understand," I said. "But before we discuss that, you wanted to say something else." He looked at me, a brief, unguarded look of surprise that disappeared quickly. "Yes," he said, "I did." He was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that happens when someone is choosing words not for their efficiency, but for their honesty. "I put you in a situation without the full picture," he said. "I told myself I was protecting you by keeping information from you, that it was cleaner if you didn't know the full nature of what this family is and what my life involves." He stopped. "What I actually did was place you inside a danger you hadn't consented to." "You're right," I said. "That was wrong. I know." Something shifted in his face then. The composure didn't break, not exactly, but something came very close to the surface. Something that looked, for just a moment, like genuine grief. Like a man who had built so many walls for so long that he had accidentally walled himself inside them, and only recently understood what that had cost everyone around him. "She fought for you, you know," he said. When I told her after the first month that I wasn't certain the arrangement was working, she told me that you were the first person in years who had looked at her like she was still fully alive. She told me if I sent you away, she would not speak to me for a month. I almost smiled. "There is something else," he said. He leaned forward slightly. "My mother told me you know about Minu." I met his eyes. "She told me he left, that he emails her on her birthday. That she has a grandchild she has never met." James Park looked out the window at the garden for a long moment. His jaw was set. His hands were still in his lap. But he was not composed the way he had been composed before. Something real was happening behind his face. "I need to say something to you," I said. "And you can take it or leave it." "Say it." "Your mother is 74 years old. She had a stroke. 3 men tried to take her from her own garden 2 days ago. She is sitting in the next room right now, alive and safe, partly because she screamed loud enough for neighbors to call the police." I paused. Time is not a resource any of us have without limits. "And the thing she grieves most is not the stroke, and it is not your father's death, and it is not even the life she built inside your world. The thing she grieves most is that boy in Vancouver she has never held." James Park said nothing. "Think about it," I said. "That is all I'm asking." He sat with that for a long moment. Then he looked back at me and said, "You are not what I expected." "People rarely are," I said. That evening before I left, I went to Hannah's room. She was awake. Sitting up, the blanket across her lap, the jade bracelet on her wrist catching the last of the fading light from the windows. The Lowe's Angels Hills were turning purple and soft in the distance. She looked at me when I came in and patted the chair beside her. I sat. "My son asked you to stay," she said. "Yes, what did you tell him?" "I told him I needed to speak with you first." A small nod. "Good answer." "Hannah," I said, "I want to ask you honestly, do you want me here?" "Not your son. You." She looked at me the way she had looked at me on the very first day, that deep, unhurried gathering of information. But this time, there was something different in it. This time, the study was not assessing whether I was worth her trust. This time, it was simply seeing me, fully, without any evaluation at all. "The day you came," she said, "I was sitting in this chair thinking that I had become furniture in my own house, old furniture, kept because no one wanted to deal with removing it." She paused. "You looked at me like I was a person, not a problem, not a burden, a person with a full life still inside her." "You are," I said. "Yes," she said. "You reminded me." She reached out and took my hand in her good hand, warm and steady. "Stay," she said. "I have one thing to tell you first," I said. She waited. "I spoke to your son about Minu." The hand holding mine tightened slightly. "I didn't tell him what to do," I said. "I only told him to think about time. About how much of it we have and how we use what we're given." Hannah was very still for a long moment. Then she said, "What did he say?" "Nothing," I said. "But he heard it," she nodded slowly. She looked out at the darkening hills. Her right hand moved without her looking down to the jade bracelet on her wrist, touched it once. And then she looked back at me and said simply, "Stay." "I'll stay," I told her. I stayed with Hannah Park for 2 years. In that time, her left side strength improved in ways that surprised her physicians. They credited consistent physical therapy. I credited something harder to measure: she wanted to be well. She had reasons to be well. She worked toward it with the same disciplined, private determination she brought to everything that mattered to her. She worked in her garden every week. She taught me the names of every rose variety she grew, their correct names, not the simplified common names, the full botanical names. And she tested me on them with a quiet, please severity when I got them wrong. She talked more about Busan, about her husband, about the early years in Los Angeles when the city had felt immense and incomprehensible, about the version of herself she had been before the stroke and before the long contraction into silence, and about how strange and good it felt to be expanding again. 8 months after the night in the garden, she told me that Minu had called. Not an email, a real call, a long one. She told me this in the morning when I arrived, with her composure fully intact the way it always was in public, but she was wearing the jade bracelet on her left wrist, her weak wrist. She had worked it onto that wrist herself, struggling with the clasp, choosing deliberately to wear it differently on this particular morning. I understood immediately what that meant. Something had changed, something had shifted enough to mark. I didn't say a word about the bracelet. I simply helped her get it secure, and we moved on with our morning. But I carried it with me the whole day. That small, dignified, private act of marking a change. 3 months after that, she showed me a photograph on her phone. A boy with dark hair and his grandmother's eyes. He was perhaps 7 or 8, standing in what looked like a park, holding a maple leaf almost as big as his face. He was laughing. Daniel, she said. I looked at the photograph for a long time. I looked at her. He knows about me, she said. Minu told him. She paused. He asked to speak to me on the phone last Sunday. I felt something rise in my chest that I didn't immediately have a name for. What did you talk about? I asked. He asked me if I had a garden, she said. I told him yes, I had roses. He told me his favorite color was green. She paused again, a pause that contained a great deal. He said he wanted to see a green rose. What did you tell him? She looked at me with something that was not quite a smile and was much better than a smile. I told him green roses are very rare, she said. I told him perhaps one day he could come and help me look for one. I didn't trust my voice for a moment. When I found it, I said, you should start looking. Yes, she said, I think I should. As for her daughter and soul, that relationship did not transform dramatically. Some distances are too old and too complicated for quick resolution. But after the attack, when her daughter called the following week, Hannah told me the conversation had been different. Shorter but more real, less managed. Her daughter had cried briefly, which apparently had never happened before on one of their calls, and Hannah had let her. It is a beginning, Hannah said when she told me. Small, but real. Small but real. I thought that was perhaps the most honest description of how healing actually works that I had ever heard. James Park's world remained complicated. I did not pretend otherwise, and I made a deliberate peace with what I knew and what I chose not to pursue knowing. Inside that house, inside the rooms where Hannah lived and moved and tended her roses, and slowly, carefully, began reaching back toward the people she loved, inside those rooms, there was no danger. There was only a woman growing older with dignity, and another woman who had come to care for her deeply and truly. When I left, my father fell seriously ill in Enugu, and I needed to go home. I gave Hannah 2 weeks' notice. She received this information with her characteristic composure. She asked about my father. She asked about the hospital. She asked whether I had adequate funds for the flight, and when I said yes, she looked at me for just long enough that I understood she was deciding whether to press the issue. And then she decided not to. On my last morning, we were in the garden. She called me to where she was standing near the rose bushes, and she took the jade bracelet off her wrist. She held it out to me. Hannah, I said. I can't take this. You can, she said. You will. That was your husband's mother's. Yes, she said. She gave it to me when I married him. She said it was for a woman with more strength than she was given credit for. She looked at me directly, the way she had looked at me since the very first day, fully, completely, without reduction. You are exactly the person it belongs with next. I couldn't speak for a moment. The weight of everything we had been to each other in 2 years sat in that space between us. 2 women. Different countries, different languages, different histories, different kinds of wounds. who had found in each other something precise and irreplaceable. I held out my wrist. She put the bracelet on me. I held her then. She held back with both arms, the strong one and the weak one, both of them, and I felt the full reality of what I was leaving, and I knew I was coming back. I walked out through the garden. Past the roses, through the gate. I drove away with the jade bracelet on my wrist, green and warm against my skin. I went home to Enugu. I cared for my father through 8 difficult months. He recovered. He is well. He calls me every Sunday, and every Sunday he says, "My daughter, the nurse," with a pride that still tightens my throat. I came back to Los Angeles. I drove back to Mulholland Drive. Hannah was in the garden when I arrived, working among her roses, her wide-brimmed hat on, her good hand moving carefully, her left side doing what it could. She heard the gate and she turned. She looked at me for a moment across the garden. Then she said, "You're late." "I know," I said. "The white roses need deadheading." "I can see that," I said. I found the garden tools in the shed where I had left them. The hoe was leaning against the wall exactly where I had set it down on the night everything changed. I picked it up, put on my gloves, walked over and stood beside her in the afternoon light. We went to work. I want to tell you what that night taught me. Not the attack itself, not the 3 men and the garden hoe and the sirens, though that is the dramatic center of this story, and I understand why it draws the eye. What I want to tell you is what was true before the attack and what remained true long after it. When I walked toward those men in that garden, I was not thinking about mafia bosses or Korean crime families or the complicated geography of James Park's dangerous world. I was thinking about a small woman sitting behind me who had told me she had begun to feel like furniture. I was thinking about someone who had called me Ada and eaten my soup and taught me, without ever saying it directly, that strength passes through women like something essential. Like water finding its way down through rock, patient and persistent and unstoppable. People ask me sometimes what courage is. I don't use that word easily. But if I had to answer honestly, courage is not the absence of fear. I was terrified in that garden. My legs were shaking. My mouth was dry. I was fully, completely afraid. Courage is deciding that what you are protecting is worth more than your own comfort, worth more than your own safety, worth the cost. Hannah Park was worth that cost. She still is. Some people come into your life and change the shape of it so quietly and so completely that by the time you understand what has happened, you cannot remember what you were before them. I arrived at that house in April carrying my nursing bag and my financial worry and my particular immigrant's loneliness. I arrived as a professional. I arrived as a stranger. I left understanding something about family that I had not known before. That family is not always blood. That sometimes it is 2 women sitting on a garden path in the dark, one holding the other while the sirens come. That sometimes it is soup made from the right ingredients. A bracelet passed from one wrist to another. A grandchild asking about green roses. That sometimes the most important things that happen between people happen quietly, over time, in the ordinary spaces between the dramatic moments. Those ordinary spaces. That is where the real story lives. That is where I found mine. To every nurse who has ever held a stranger's hand in the dark and asked for nothing in return, you are seen. And to every woman who has ever been made to feel like furniture when she was always the foundation, your strength is your own. It always was.